think if you need to debug a team, right? There's that one team. There's always that one team. But everyone is like, oh no, it's that team. What's kind of that one team? Everyone else is fine, but that one team is, like they're just so much slower and so much buggier. And like, what's happening? That's doing what you want to debug. And you really want to debug it if you don't know what's going on. If you know what's going on, cool. Hopefully you can fix it. But if you don't know, like that's when debugging comes into it.
Hey everyone, I'm Debbie Madden, host of the Scaling Tech podcast. And today I'm here with a good friend that I've known for many, many years, over a decade at least, Lisa Van Gelder. Hey Lisa, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Debbie?
Good. Thanks for being with us. And thank you for talking about this topic, how to debug your team, which I love and I can't wait to jump in. For those that don't know Lisa first, so Lisa's been in tech as long as I have, for almost 25 years, range of companies from startups to larger companies like The Guardian and Meetup. She used to debug code and now she debugs teams for a living, which I love. And most recently, Lisa was the VP of engineering at a startup called Avir. And she has more cats than you might think. And when asked, she said she has 3 cats. So we'll leave it to the listener to decide if that's more than they might think. So let's jump in. So what does it mean to you? Like, what do you mean by debugging your team? I always like to start with like shared vocab.
Yeah, sure. So the same way as you debug your code, like you've written your code, you know it's right, it's going to solve that problem, and you run it and it just doesn't do the thing that you expect. Same thing for your team. Like, giving your team everything they need to be successful, but now velocity is really low, and there's lots of bugs, and the team just really isn't engaged, and you just don't know what's going on. So same with your code. This is the way you want to debug to see what the issues are.
Okay, I get that. And I think, lots of folks that listen to this podcast are in tech and they're like us, right? And so I think that makes sense. But now I think this is one of those topics where like the devil's in the details. And so let's say you are listening to this, okay, I want to debug my team, or I don't know if I should be debugging my team. So kind of where does one start?
So I would start with metrics, because as soon as you start talking about things like speed and performance, the things are really subjective. You want to make sure you know what the starting point is to see if any changes are working. And also, ideally, we want to use metrics to see if there's something you should dig into. If there are like obvious areas that for your code or for your team that you should dig into and understand. The metrics that I typically start with are the DORA metrics, which come from Google. We spent a lot of time trying to understand what makes high-performing teams. And specifically, there's 3 DORA metrics I love to use, which is deployment frequency. So how often is the team deploying to production? Change fail rate. How often does deployment cause problems in production due to rollbacks, critical bugs, etc. And lastly, mean time to recover. So when there's an issue, how long does it take to get the system back into good working state? And to those 3 metrics, I like to add one more, which comes from the leaner flavor of Agile, which is cycle time. That is how long it takes between an engineer starting to work on a story, and the story being live in production, which I'd love to use rather than velocity, because velocity is different for each team, right? Is 15 points a sprint good or bad? It really depends on the team, because how teams estimate is very different. Cycle time is the same. It takes you 3 days to get a story to production. It takes you 3 days to get the story to production. Often I work with early stage startups, so they're not tracking these metrics. So I track them manually to begin with. I'll just go get like cycle time, wherever stories come from, deployment frequency from wherever you do your deployments, because I'm not sure if these are the right metrics to track going forwards. It'd be a waste of time to create a really fancy dashboard about them. Let's just start to get understanding of like, where are we? Maybe one of them is not so great, like cycle time is really high. When I got to Meetup, it was taking about 30 days for one story to get to production. So like, this is a good thing we should dig into, see what the bottlenecks are. And that's where we start to track, not the other ones.
Okay, that's interesting. So a couple of things. So first, I am going to put a link in the show notes, for Spotify and YouTube for the DORA metrics. So if you guys want to figure out where to find those, we can find those below. And the second thing is, so whether folks are using all of these metrics, right? So the deployment frequency, the change fail rate, the mean time to recover, or the cycle time. I understand that cycle time over 30 days seems like a lot to me, but is there like a black and white answer? Is 2 days bad? Is 5 days bad? How do you? I want to know. Yeah, how do you get the data and how do you interpret the data? And we'll dig into that. But like, is there any sort of like if there's any above one number in any of these, immediately we know that there's at least improvement to be had, or is it kind of fuzzy based on the team?
I think generally it's shades of grey. There's very little
Okay.
things, any of this that is black and white. So you talk to the team and figure out what is going on. Things for like deployment frequency, like my default is like a team that is working the way I expect with smallish stories should deploy to production, and maybe 1 or 2 times a week. So that team is deployed every 2 to 3 months. I'm like, that seems a bit slow to me. I'm not understanding something. That's when you go talk to the team to see like is there data that you're missing to see why things are like that. Same with cycle time. I think that 30 days for one story seems really, really, really big for me. But maybe there's something else going on. Maybe, as in this case, the team was not using feature flags, which meant that any release to production had to go live to users, in which case, of course, that makes sense. You don't want to release things to users that are not ready. But then the fix, I would say, is let's have feature flags so you can get things into the main branch as soon as possible, get them out, test them in production, which is the best place to test them, but not on users, like on QAs, you people at the company, so you can see if things are working.
Okay, that's what I was assuming you were going to say. But so given their shades of gray, and also that it's not just a number and then a fix. It's a number, a discussion, iteration, and so how, like, what are your best practices that you've seen to actually gather this data? Because you said often startups aren't tracking this, but my guess is probably larger companies sometimes aren't tracking this either, right? So how would like you going into a new team, how do you usually kind of gather this data as a new leader?
I'd say the first thing is talk to people, talk to stakeholders, talk to
Okay.
everyone on the team, ask open questions, what's going well, what's not going well. Often if you see something in those initial metrics, the team is seeing it too. They may not call it the same thing, but you want to like triangulate for the places that the whole team also sees as problems, plus see if there's any other areas to work on. And then again, once you've chatted with your team, get close to them. Talking is one thing, but actually seeing what it's like day by day working on a team is a different thing. So go to all the ceremonies, hang with the team, do some retros, and see if you can spot things. Because sometimes people on the team don't spot it because it's not all the water that they're swimming in, that you don't see it anymore. You're good having some outside eyes just coming in to see what is going on. And then once you've done all that, I would do a retro with the team targeted on like, hey, we all agree that there's something going on here around flaky tests. A, what have you tried before? And then B, what ideas does the team have to do something to impact those?
Yeah, I like how you also touched on the vocabulary piece, because I find so often teams spend a lot of time thinking they're disagreeing with each other, but really they're not, but they're just they don't have a shared vocabulary, right? So before you get into this, oh, our cycle time is high. No, it's not. Like, okay, well, what does that mean to you?
Yeah,
Like, what does that word mean to you? Not what does good cycle time look? What does that word mean to you? What other words and what other vocab does this team use? And so I really like the kind of join the ceremonies, get close to them, do retros, so important. And so, okay, so I'm imagining this process. So you're kind of taking a look. You're starting with this hypothesis that you have these DORA metrics, these initial small data sets, if you will. You gather them, and then after you talk to the team, observe, have conversations, how do you then interpret the data? Because I just briefly said, is it black and white? You said no, it all depends. There's shades of gray. So then, because at the end of the day, you do want to decide if you should debug your team. And so what, and then this is not just for folks in the leadership, but this is for, again, like you said, like the teams are probably seeing the same pain, right? So what do you as a leader and the teams, how do we interpret the data collectively?
yeah. I love what you said also about vocabulary, because it's also why it's so important not to just take the initial metrics and be like, we're tracking this stuff. That's what the team is focusing on, because it might not map at all to how the team thinks about things. For how you interpret things, I have a book which I think is a really great framework for how to interpret why things are going on with the team. I think the metrics are a really great tool for like what is happening on the team. The metrics, the book gives you the why. The book is called Drive by Dan Ping. It's like nothing to do with teams at all. It's more about human motivation, but I think it adds really nicely to team motivation. So Dan says that there are three main things that humans need to feel fulfilled, which are mastery. So does your team have the tools to do the job? Autonomy. Are they given problems to solve, or are they just told step by step on a checklist do these things? And purpose. Does the team know why they're doing things? They know what the impact is of the work on a wider company. And to those three things, I also add safety, like psychological safety, which also comes from Google's research on high-performing teams, where teams that don't have safety will take risks. They won't try things. They'll be afraid to make change, and they will cover their ass. What that framework gives me is that if a team does not have mastery, autonomy, purpose, or safety, it's going to behave a bit weirdly. And those are things that I look for when I'm talking to the team, observing to see what is going on, etc.
If one of these four things is missing, right, mastery, autonomy, purpose, or safety, do you then debug that before you debug the other data that you found, or do you do it in parallel?
It's usually connected.
Okay.
So, often the answer is like, my team is behaving strangely. They're not deploying. Why are they not deploying? Let's look to see what's going on. Oh, it's a safety thing. They're not deploying because deployments aren't safe. Then that's the thing that you would look to fix. But you still do it with conversations as well. So once I've done use my framework to figure out looks like safety. Again, go chat to people. Looks like you're not deploying because deployments aren't safe. Like, does that resonate with you? Is that right? Do you think something else is more important? People say, no, they're not safe. Great, okay. So that's my thing. It's not just one thing, usually also. This is iterative. So you find a starting point with your team, you validate with your team as a starting point. You try some things. A tool that I love to use for this is Kaizen. So Japanese word for little steps on our way to a bigger goal. Because often things like deployment frequency, like just deploying every day, it's a big thing to do. You can't quite figure out what the steps are you have to get to it. But if you say, let's just see if we can deploy twice as much as we currently do. It's a more reasonable goal. And then you discuss with the team again in the retro, what might we do to hit that Kaizen? You measure it. Did it work? Did it not work? More steps to get to the next goal. But again, there's more than one goal here. Debugging takes a long time. It's not just, it was safety, fix this one thing and then we're done. It's no, okay. We got safety. Someone's hiding underneath safety. Looks like there's some mastery things going on here, but too, with flaky tests.
My guess is it's probably even more nuanced than that. It's probably different individuals have different senses of where they are, right? Because let's say you're a new technologist and you've been on the job for 6 months versus you've been working for 20 plus years in your career, you might have different definitions of good for all of these things, right? And so it's probably even more nuanced than at the team level, but still the team needs to have these things in the collective to achieve the goals. So I think that's fascinating. Okay, so my next question, to really kind of continue on that path of how do we kind of break down this debugging your team into itself chunks and pieces. It's a very different thing to debug a 5-person team than a 500-person team. So is there an optimal size? Can you be too big, too small? How do you think about this in terms of, a global engineering team of 1,000 versus a startup where everybody knows everybody's name?
This is where the word team is the one that's really unhelpful, because you get individual team and bigger engineering team. But you need to debug one team at a time. So if you're in a place that has more than one engineering team, you got to start with one, because teams are made of humans. And humans are all different. And that means a lot of the time the causes of slowness is different on one team than a different team. Also, because ideally you want to make some changes. You know that those Kaizens, you can't do shit with Kaizen with 1,000 engineers all at the same time. You really got to do it on that smaller team to try some things out, to bring the engineers along with you as you do the change, and then see if you can apply your learnings to a larger team. Sometimes you can. Sometimes there are things that also apply to the larger team. Like I had teams that have really had lots of problems with flaky tests. If one team has flaky test issues, they're probably not the only ones who have flaky test issues. So that's a good idea to bring some learnings. But sometimes it really is just individual. Again, at a rear, trying to work out why cycle time was really slow on one team, I looked at the stories, and I saw stories that said, build as per design. Very complicated design attached. And I'm like, that's not going to work. There's no acceptance criteria whatsoever. The engineers are not going to know how to, what to do with that story. And that was just on that one team. There was a product manager who much preferred to do things verbally rather than in written format, but it really confused the team. There was no need there to have story lessons for the whole company, but it was definitely for that team. Versus the flaky tests, definitely need to have flaky test lessons. People did not know how to write good non-flaky tests.
All right, so we're starting to kind of get deeper and deeper into the shape of this, right? For this larger goal. Everybody knows you and I have been doing this a long time. You change one thing and you have unintended consequences or unintended positive outcomes, right? Think, the unknown unknowns, the unexpected things happen. And so, like you said, everything's interconnected. Safety, mastery, all the different metrics, and then the teams work together. So how do you, what's your advice for if some of these debugging activities then cause actually new problems, whether it be a new metric that's slower or cause the team to lose its sense of purpose, right? Or, what if something that you did, like a negative, comes out of this positive change? How do you advise people navigate that?
Yeah, that can definitely happen. You're changing a complex system, so sometimes the changes that you make can have negative consequences. I think the answer to this is really stakeholder management. So make sure that stakeholders know upfront that sometimes you need to go slower to go faster. If you're addressing things like tech debt or flaky tests, sometimes you've got to do some investment to get some more speed out of your team later on. I think at the beginning, when I was just starting to figure out how to debug teams, I was not so good at that. As good at debugging teams, and bad at stakeholder management. So at Bauer, this is a good few years ago now, I felt like the team was being too cautious. They were terrified of creating bugs in production, so they were over-testing. They were doing way too much manual testing. They were doing way too much automatic testing. So I told them, go fast and break things. Let's just take out some of these tests, then we can figure out which ones actually need to be there. It was just such a big tangle of stuff. And you can probably guess exactly what happened, which is, look, a whole bunch of bugs in production. Then I had to go talk to my stakeholder and be like, yes, this was intentional, and I'm very sorry. we had to get rid of a lot of this stuff just to get the team to figure out what a good test looked like. We needed a whole bunch of fast talking to fix things, which could have been solved by a discussion up front.
Now, you didn't hear it from me, but this is everyone should think hard if you want to ask for forgiveness or permission in these situations, because it's nuanced, but yeah, I could see a lot of, this happened, it's going to be okay, or this is going to happen and it's going to be okay.
Yeah, I think maybe a little heads up might have been better than everything's on fire.
Right. Yeah. A little heads up, I think, goes a long way. That's funny. Right. Because I think for stakeholder management is so important, because the stakeholder often won't see the intentionality. They'll just see the negative outcome. Right. And unless you proactively tell them, many stakeholders won't assume that something negative was intended.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully, you're all the way through the process, you are explaining what your kaizens are, what your team is working on, how it's going. But sometimes they don't work. Also, kind of a bit nuanced again. For do you want to say it didn't work, or do you want to wait until the next thing comes along because you think that was a better chance of working? Because it's not always a smooth path. You know exactly what's going on and how to turn things around.
Yeah. If we zoom out a little bit, we've talked about the details on how to think through the data, how to have the conversation with the team, stakeholder management. We've touched on a lot of areas. You talked through some stories, which I appreciate you sharing. I want to kind of circle back to kind of where we started and end up with I'd imagine there's the edge cases where with clearly everything's going right well, or clearly there needs to be heavy debugging. Those are probably easier to tackle than, well, should we just leave the team alone? Is everything going? Is it good enough? No one, most teams aren't perfect all the time. I don't know of any that are, but how do you? Because this debugging takes a lot of time. It requires a lot of ongoing finesse, just to the team and to the stakeholders. It's not free. It costs a lot of time, right? So how do you know when it's really like tipped over into, okay, now we're debugging the team versus let's wait it out another quarter and see if everything's okay? Like, how do you make that ultimate call? Is there any kind of guidelines you can share with us for that?
Yeah, I'd say like debugging does take a lot of time. So if your team is doing okay, like maybe your metrics are acceptable, but not fantastic, but it's okay. And it's trending okay. Like maybe it's all right. I think if you need to debug a team, right? There's that one team. There's always that one team. Everyone is like, oh no, it's that team. What was kind of that one team? Everyone else is fine, but that one team is, like they're just so much slower and so much buggier. And like, what's happening? That's assuming what you want to debug. And you really want to debug it if you don't know what's going on. If you know what's going on, cool. You hopefully you can fix it. But if you don't know, like that's when debugging comes into it. Examples when you might know what's going on. There's so many layoffs happening right now. Oof, it's a rough time. So if you have a team that lost some team members due to a layoff, no, they were well liked, well respected folks on the team. That team is doing badly. You have a pretty good idea of what's going on that team. You don't need to debug.
Yeah.
You should probably look at something about morale on that team, but don't jump in. It's really at the point when the team is performing bad enough, you don't know why, and you think it's worth investing that effort.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think to put a general comment on what I just heard you say, it's not ever only about the team and what they're doing internally. There's almost always benefit in looking externally, either to the company or to the industry or to the to the world, because things that are happening around the team will influence their efficiency. So yeah, if there were layoffs at a company, absolutely take that into consideration when approaching this, which I really like. I mean, and yeah, it's a tough time for tech teams. Not only layoffs, but there's a lot of change happening. The way code is being written is changing, right? Like, so the job of the engineer with all of these new AI products, there's a lot of change happening externally. So definitely be sensitive to that. Yeah, that's good advice. So sadly, we're out of time, but this has been great. I really appreciate you coming talking to us today. And thank you to everyone for listening and watching. And we'll see you soon. Bye, Lisa.
Hi, Debbie.